Hello, if you've been here before, welcome back. If not, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about media that I want to talk about. This is me covering the 6 episodes of Sheeple Chase. Sheeple Chase is the fictional in-world podcast of Georgie Barker and Celia Ripley in the Magnus Protocol world. This is a parallel to What the Ghost, the podcast that Georgie had in Magnus Archives, which they did produce 2 episodes of it during season 5, I believe after season 5, or as between 2 hiatuses. They made What the Ghost, and it was just Georgie doing this podcast talking about hauntings, and it was really fun, but didn't really do anything. But this also didn't really do anything. But these are 6 episodes that they produced. I believe these were part of stretch goals for the funding of Magnus Protocol a few years ago when they were setting up for this. They asked for money from fans and they reached their goal to be able to fund to make Magnus Protocol. And so these 6 episodes that I'm going to be covering, I will say 5 of them are not necessary at all. And then the 6th one is good, also unnecessary, but also helpful. Supplemental, if you will. But overall, the 6 Sheeple Chase, Sheeple Chase, I keep wanting to call it Steeple Chase, which is what it's referencing, but also Sheeple obviously being people who are sheep. Almost said people who are she. This is obviously a conspiracy theorist podcast in comparison to the ghost haunting podcast of What the Ghost, obviously. Georgie had a little change in her character here, which was kind of fun. And so these 6 episodes are not necessary to listen to for the plot of Magnus Protocol, but some things do fill in some blanks, and this might be proven incorrect in future episodes if things that are mentioned here come back in the future. So we'll keep an eye out for that. Not much hope for it, but if it happens, hey, I love being incorrect. So we'll start with episode 1, Dead Singer, which is episode 52 of Sheeple Chase. It was released on October 2nd, 2025. And so I'm gonna not be as repetitive, but it is pretty repetitive in terms of the structure of the podcast, which I think is a good thing. I think it's really smart that they had this repetitive structure because it's easy to produce in the fictional Georgie's view, but also easy to produce as a really quick, let's do this thing here just to give us a reward. And so there's the general same things as throughout the first 5 episodes. Celia and Georgie introduce themselves, introduce the show. It's all remote recorded. The transcript says there's background noise and it's badly recorded. I disagree. It sounded pretty good to me. I don't know. Anyways, they introduce replacing celebrities. This is a conspiracy, is replacing celebrities. But before they get into it, they get into sponsored ads. So these sponsored ads are really fun. They're just fake little things that are being sold. That these are all written, I will say, by Sasha Sienna, who is the voice of Georgie Barker. And I think she has a really fun imagination creating these fictional organizations, businesses that sell questionable things, and Georgie in world is selling them as an ad to get money. And I think in archives, you could tell that Georgie was not very happy with making these weird ads, but here, at least, either she is still not very happy with it, but she's glad to do it, or she's like, yeah, this is money, let's have fun with it. And it's Celia who's not really happy to do these ads. And so a great contrast between those two. The first ad is for Clonely Hearts, a queer dating and wardrobe sharing app. That's fun. First, Celia introduces Paul McCartney from the Beatles being replaced by Bill Shears, and Georgie dismisses the conspiracy for a profit-seeking record labels. Record labels created this conspiracy so people would buy the Beatles because they wanted to figure out if Paul McCartney is dead or not, and also to drive up sales. because no one's listening to the Beatles. I don't like the Beatles. Anyways, Celia also introduces Avril Lavigne being replaced by Melissa Vandella off of a Portuguese blog post. And Georgie lets slip that she has a tattoo and doesn't elaborate on it. She deflects when Celia asks about it. And then there's another sponsor ad for Pong Remastered. Pong being the video game where you have the two lines that you manipulate and you make sure that the ping pong ball hits them. Boop, boop, boop. That really old game. There's an ad for that for a remastered version. And then we move on to Georgie talks about Mia's Missing, who is a member of the Manic Pixie Scream Girls. And people didn't seem to recognize Mia Hill, and they think that she was replaced after a quote-unquote murder or quote-unquote disappearance. And this is an actual, not an IRL conspiracy. This is original within protocol. So, for example, Paul McCartney and Avril Lavigne being replaced by people is an actual IRL conspiracy, but Mia Hill and the Manic Pixie Scream Girls are not real people. It is a real within protocol, but not real within our world. Georgie's not convinced about Avril Lavigne and believes that the Beatles' one is to sell more copies of the album. And then she remembers Mia's Missing being larger, but guess not. I don't know what that is all about, but she's like, I'm pretty sure it was a bigger conspiracy than it actually is. And Celia was like, well, there's not that much here anyways. And then they finish up, they have updates of life. Georgie has a dog named Captain Barker. Next, we have Spray Isn't So, episode 53, which was released October 9th, 2025. In the intro, as usual, they talk about Captain Barker real quickly, and Celia has not been sleeping well lately. And then there's a sponsor ad for Sleep Tight Mattress, mattresses that shape around your body. That's terrifying. And Georgie introduces the conspiracy of chemtrails. Clouds from planes are full of chemicals. And so she gives a compare and contrast between contrails, which are frozen condensation following in the wake of cold air combustions in an engine, and then chemtrails are like contrails but linger longer and are followed by weird effects. And the effects range from mind control, weather manipulation, weapons testing, population controls, and combating climate change. Georgia thinks that mind control is inefficient and should be actually spread. The chemicals to mind control would be spread better through the water supply. Why are you thinking about that, Georgie? And in 1996, the U.S. Air Force published a report about owning the weather in 2025. So 1996 report about the future. And it was mixed in with a chemical theory, which began this chemtrails conspiracy. And Georgie begins explaining cloud seeding, which was done in 2008 in China for the Beijing Olympics. And you could use cloud seeding to combat climate change, which would be to control heat buildup and dispersal. She mentions that cloud seeding does also contain silver iodide, which in high amounts is carcinogenic and changes skin color. And then she also says they use very, very, very small amounts in cloud seeding. There's another sponsor ad for Soul Trader to sell your soul. And then Georgie shows a report of government officials actually spraying their citizens. She talks about various different agencies and the government, military stuff that have actually released harmful chemicals into people's everyday lives. That actually happened, but there are no commercial airlines that are doing this. So the chemtrails thing is loosely related to that, but yeah. They sign off, and Georgie has a less exciting date planned with a maybe serial killer. Hello? Okay. And she has a crush on a famous YouTube ghost hunter, Melanie King. She says that she has soulful eyes that have seen terrible things. That's fun. Third episode, episode 54, Da Minister, released October 16th, 2025. Intro as normal. Celia looks tired and she has no makeup on. And an ad plays for SubSub, a subscription service management servant subscription. I got it right the first time. And it is £49.99 a month. That's a lot. I think that's a lot. I believe the conversion rate is pretty similar. I think it's like $1.50 for every pound. I'm not sure. Celia introduces a conspiracy that the 1964 Prime Minister of the UK, Harold Wilson, is a KGB spy. There was a defector from Russia named Anatoly Golitsyn, who named a list of KGB agents in the US and UK, and Harold Wilson was one of them, who was the Prime Minister at that time. They didn't mention it, but I also think Harold Wilson is a very common name, so that may have contributed to conspiracy theories evidence. Anyways, and she talks about different evidences for him being a spy, which includes different things like he wore a coat that had a Lithuanian styling, and the owner of that coat seller knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone. I don't know how many knew someones there were that played chess with someone who knew someone who knew someone who was a KGB agent or something or another like that. Definitely like stretching out the evidence there to make a connection that this prime minister is a KGB spy. Overall, Golitsyn was seen as unreliable. However, he did help uncover the Cambridge 5 spy ring. I don't know what that is. I should have researched it for this video, but I feel like that would just be a bigger hole that I would fall through, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. And then there's another sponsor ad for Itsuck Online, an e-course for how to spot and avoid scams online. Ironic there, because this is also £300 a year. That's a scam. And we move on. MIA was actually watching and had bugged Harold Wilson. He was very paranoid, but also because he was actually being spied on. And so, but they never uncovered anything for him. He's not a spy. Like, come on. He's just a boring prime minister. And Georgie asked if this is what made him think that Downing Street was haunted. And there's a moment here where Celia's like, what are you talking about? And she doesn't know anything about this. But yeah, apparently Harold Wilson thought that Downing Street was haunted, according to Georgie. And then there was also a plot by Cecil King, who is from a publishing company or something or another. There was a coup to oust him, but that conspiracy died before it even got on its feet. And then there was 2 possible conspiracies against him after that. At one point, ex-military personnel had prepared to oust him if it was revealed that he was a KGB spy. Like, they weren't ready to oust him, but if he was a KGB spy, then they'd be ready. So that's great. And he was spied on by other people. So the conspiracy about being a spy led to other conspiracies against him. Really funny. That must have been horrible. And overall, Georgie is just not convinced that he is a KGB spy at all. And in the end, Georgie teases a special guest for an episode in the future very soon. I guess we can see who it is. 4th episode, episode 55, Strife on Mars, released October 23rd. Intro as normal, and then Celia asks Georgie about her date. She says that the serial killer date went pretty well the first time, and he had asked her about her deepest fears. And when Celia asked her, what are your deepest fears, she went on a long tirade of different horrifying things. At the very top, she said, was heights, that she was really scared of. And then she had a second date with the serial killer, and it was bungee jumping. And she had panicked and could not jump off, so that date didn't work out. There is no third date with this serial killer guy, but there is another date with the jump instructor themselves. So that's really fun. Then there's a sponsor ad for Toe Beans socks. And it's just a foot fetish ad. They're asking for exact measurements and pictures of people's feet, and then they'll send you socks with like toe. It can fit your toes around inside. What's it called? Do you know those shoes? You can see the toes. It's like that, but the socks. It's a foot fetish ad. And then Georgie introduces space conspiracies just in general, and Celia is understandably perturbed. She's like, come on, I don't want to hear this anymore, because I assume that Georgie talks about it a lot. She begins saying that in Aztec, New Mexico, in 1948, there was a flying saucer that had crashed with objects filled with objects called doodle bugs, and that this was only reported on because the journalist had found two men selling these doodle bugs, and so he wrote about that in an article. And that caused a big stir about UFOs. Later, those two men that were selling the doodle bugs were convicted of fraud. That journalist published a book later on that ignites governments creating covert agencies for aliens. And so Georgie asks, do you want to hear my favorite covert agency for aliens? And her favorite covert agency for aliens is Australian, the UFO Research Association. They were asked by the Sydney Morning Herald with an Freedom of Information Act request for reports on UFOs, and they gave excessive excuses for why they don't have any reports, except for one of these, which was just a drawing. The report was just a drawing of a UFO on a restaurant napkin by a witness who then recanted his statement. Georgie found that very ironic and funny. And after that, many books were published after that, mentions of Men in Black. There are similar incidents that were reported, possible plagiarism between them, sort of like one happened before the other, but the book was published later and different things happened here and there. Really different conspiracies starting to pile up. And Georgia begins to continue, has 15 pages of notes. And Celia puts her foot down. She's like, I will not do this right now. Just do something important. Just one thing. Edit. And Georgie cuts to a sponsor ad for Ecopocalypse, which is a business that sells apocalypse preparation supplies, but they're eco-friendly and vegan. We return and they start talking about Roswell and the UFO crash there, government cover-ups. There's just a bunch of different conspiracies happening at the same time. In the end, Georgie wants to visit a UFO museum in New Mexico. Fifth episode, episode 56, Coke-Conspirators, released October 30th. Normal intro as usual. And then Georgie addresses some online drama. She had DM'd Melanie King, inviting her onto the podcast, but Melanie had screenshotted the message and posted it online, covered up Georgie's face or Georgie's handle so that it would be anonymous, and then she said that she didn't like to get lumped in with misinformation podcasts, among other words. And so Georgie says she's taking a break from social media. Melanie has said that she didn't realize she didn't think that anyone would know who it is because their fan base is so small. Celia says that their fan base is small but dedicated, and those dedicated fans knew that it was Georgie who had messaged them, and so they were defending her as well. Overall, she's like, I'm going to take a step back from that. I don't want to deal with this anymore. That's really sad. We cut to a sponsor ad for WebsMD, which is Arachnid Veterinarians. I think this is the not the best ad in terms of like the funniest ad, but like the ad that I could actually see being sold, because I think that people, vets specializing in spiders, makes sense. Unlike the rest of the ads that are shown here, that actually makes sense for something that might actually happen. We return and Celia introduces the conspiracy of New Coke. In 1985, the CEO of Coca-Cola launches New Coke to beat Pepsi. And the press release was a failure, and there was fighting between the North and the South of the United States because Coke was based in Atlanta, Pepsi based in New York. So there was like, hey, we can't, you're bowing down to the Yankees. You lost already. Focus groups had really bad experiences with New Coke, and people had started calling to complain about New Coke and about getting rid of old Coke, and had crazy complaints about it. Coke eventually brings back old Coke as Coke Classic after 79 days. Really fast turnaround. And so there's conspiracies about New Coke being released and then a failure and stuff like that. For example, people knew that New Coke would bomb, so it was a stunt, a publicity stunt to get people to buy old Coke or Coke Classic. There was an advertising push that did help rise in buying Coke Classic as well, and so that made Coke win the cola wars between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. There are other conspiracies, such as they were intending to derail bottlers because Coca-Cola itself sells syrups, not Coke itself, and the bottlers would mix that syrup with the carbonated water and sell it. And Coke didn't want to. They were in a class action lawsuit with bottlers, and so that led to It was a little complicated. It's because bottlers didn't want to sell the Coke at such high prices, and then new Coke came in, but new Coke was not really good, and so the price was lowered, which meant that it made sense for the Coke, old classic Coke, to taste really good, and so they had to have the price really good. Weird little interaction there, but basically the bottlers lost their class action lawsuit, and then Coke had a monopoly on them. There's another conspiracy that new Coca-Cola was made to cover up a change in Coke Classic or old Coke's formula, which was a change to high fructose corn syrup. And in the end, Georgie gives this very half-crazed, very plausible conspiracy between Coke, Reagan, cocaine, and stuff like that. And Celia's like, this kind of sounds kind of plausible, and I hate it. And then we cut to a sponsor ad for Everybody Doubles, which is a actors that pretend to be specific people but are everyday kinds of people. There's another mention of Mia Hill here as well. And then we cut back, and at the end of the episode, Georgie doesn't think that the jump instructor will pan out because their tortoise hates her. And now we get to the juicy stuff. Episode 6, bracket, unreleased, closed bracket, Magnus, Opus, released November 6th. We start very, very differently with some unedited audio, and Celia and Georgie are setting up to record on like a Zoom video call meeting or something like that. And the background noise is of the OIR servers. We can hear the like humming of the computers and the beeping and stuff like that, that is only have ever seen with Freddy. Captain Barker's in the background, and Georgie settles him in before they start recording, and Georgie introduces the conspiracies of the Magnus Institute, which Celia reacts to viscerally, or she like sort of gasps silently, and she's very wary about it, and Georgie sees that. She like pauses, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And Celia says that she's fine. She says it twice, and both times we hear a glitch in the recording, which means she is lying. There are no sponsor ads here. She just claps for the editing to know when to cut here and there. So the first record of the Institute through history is through a footnote of the minutes of a meeting of the Royal Society. It was founded in 1818 by Jonah Magnus. It was then in record again in 1826 in a Manchester rate book. A rate book is a log of property owned around a specific area, and who's owning it and who's paying rent and stuff like that. The institute was owned by the Magnus family, which are mill magnates, so they run mills. I believe that's food mills or sewing mills, one of those two. And the building was categorized as other, not as science, not as like philosophy, not as like anything else except other. There is no record of anything published by the institute, despite it being a scientific institute. And Celia says that maybe they're tax dodging. And Georgie's like, maybe, but also why would Charles Babbel name check Jonah in his, I believe, like book or article, Reflections on the Decline of Science in England. And he accuses Jonah Magnus of sorcery, alchemy, and worse. And then the institute doesn't appear in any sort of official records up until the 90s, when the Daily Star reports on an explosion in the institute that killed 12 scientists. At this point, Celia is a little defensive about the odd framing of this fact, but she's like, oh yeah, the building was mismanaged and like there was bad wiring and stuff like that. And Georgie asks if Celia is familiar with this, and Celia catches herself, and she's like, actually, I may have read this in the past. And that's not caught as a lie because she did. She read this in the past. Georgie says that it took 6 hours for this fire service to arrive. And Celia sort of stops the recording, or stops the flow. She tells Georgie to, like, maybe we can avoid talking about the in real life deaths of the people in the fire. I think they, at some point, transitioned into talking about the 1999 fire that burned down the Magnus Institute. In relation to the explosion that happened, I think those two are very different things, and they just sort of, the 1999 fire is so big and important that they sort of just forgot to mention that, I think. But Celia's like, I feel very uncomfortable if we talk about people who died in this fire. And Georgie's like, what are you talking about? We do this all the time. We talk about actual people, actual deaths, actual people who died in relation to conspiracies and stuff like that. And Celia's like, okay, you know what? Let's just keep going. And Georgia continues. She begins again saying that from 1818 to 1848, the Institute was very quiet up until Joanna Magnus died. And Celia is like, oh, that must have been a cover up then, right? And Georgie's like, no, because Joanna Magnus was very publicly and very famously killed in an angry mob. And in 1848, in the 1830s and 40s, there were Chartists, which was a working class movement that rioted frequently, wanting better working conditions. And Jonah Magnus and his family, being mill magnates, owned mills, would be the target for these riots. And he just found himself in a mob and was killed in that angry mob. And so it's very hard to be able to cover that up. And then as the years continue, the Institute starts changing what it wants to do. In the 1850s, they sought out artifacts with arcane, occult, or esoteric nature, and then they sought out people with supernatural abilities or people who have experienced supernatural events. And one of these supernatural events and stuff was mentioned in an early Sexton Blake story, Sexton Blake being a detective, sort of like a Sherlock Holmes, she explains, in reference to a Burning Man incident. Eyewitnesses claimed that a man ran out of the Institute while on fire, but the details vary about him and stuff like that. They also mentioned that his body was twisted extensively. What does that mean? Celia reacts very understandably. And then they move on. After that, there were moral panics about the Institute. People thought that the Institute were devil worshippers. And some theorists begin to believe that deal with aliens as well. The Institute in the 1970s and 80s ran their selective gifted children program. Ooh. They had invited children from around the world to test and offered scholarships to somewhere. They don't explain where. And there had never been any criteria revealed about these tests, nor were there any records of the Institute giving grants at all. And there were some reports of tests such as behavioral stuff, cognitive stuff. One child was given items and asked how she felt about them. And then it just stopped. Celia and Georgie bring up maybe it was economic fraud occurring, that they were laundering money for the mob, and that maybe the mob had set the fire in 1999 to cover up their dealings. But the fire after that, no one really claimed anything from the loss of it, so no one gained anything from the fire. Maybe Institute was a way for the government or the military to run experiments, and some of the evidence is, it took 6 hours for firefighters to respond as if they were delayed or told not to respond at all. And the Greater Manchester Fire Service never released any statement about the fire. And Georgie mentions that the only agency that showed up, the only agency that did anything after the fire regarding the Institute, was the Office of Incident Assessment and Response, the OIAR. After this, Celia reacts very curiously. She's like, ooh, what? And she asks, what do they do? And Georgie says that she's gotten very vague answers about what they do and what they are. And Georgie's very curious about them. They have cropped up in a few weird scenarios, but overall nothing exciting, nothing crazy that she can connect. So it wouldn't be a very good episode for the pod. And after this, she says that, this episode isn't working. The energy is all over the place. She asks if Celia is fine. Does she need to check up on Jack or something up with Jack? And she, no, nothing's wrong with Jack. And she tries to say, no, this episode's going to work. And George is like, I don't think so. It's fine. Maybe I'll just do my own sort of thing next time. Because we just wasted this entire time, but it's fine. And Celia wants to check up on something. And so she's just going to record next week. And George is like, that's fine. And as she's saying goodbye, Celia just logs off. And she doesn't say anything. And George is like, okay. And the episode ends. So, Notes. For Dead Singer, Mia Hill and the Manic Pixie Scream Girls are not real. They're originals in protocol. That conspiracy, that character, that band is not real. So maybe they might show up later. It did show up later too. We'll get to that. And also, there is no Admiral. Georgie has no cat, but she has a dog named Admiral or Captain. Sorry, Captain Barker. A fun name. For Spray It Ain't So, Celia has not been sleeping well, which is a continued motif with this character. And Georgie's serial killer date is that a joke? I feel like it is a joke. It's not going to do anything. I think that, it's great realism for these characters. They feel very lively, and this feels like something that would actually happen. And Melanie King. Melanie's not dating her. They don't know each other. They haven't met, which is crazy. And also, she says that she has soulful eyes, like she's seen terrible things. So that makes me think that maybe they're trying to imply that not only is Melanie King a YouTube ghost hunter, that she actually has experienced the horrors. Or she just might be pretty and have like striking eyes that Georgie likes. One of those two. For that minister, Celia is still very tired, another repetitive motif, and she didn't know about the haunting. And I tried looking it up. I didn't find anything that said that Harold Wilson thought that Downing Street was haunted. And so it may be an original thing in protocol. I'm not sure. If I'm wrong, please let me know. For Strife on Mars, the serial killer and the deepest fears. Oh, that's to make sure to show that Georgie has not been touched by dread. As we know in archives, Georgie does not feel fear because she had things happen to her. I'm not going to go into it, but she doesn't feel fear, right? And so here she does feel fear. She is not connected to, she doesn't know about dread, doesn't know about the supernatural that's happening. So it's a really interesting flip between I guess Georgie knew about bad stuff in archives. Georgie knew about bad stuff and Melanie didn't, and then she gets into it. But here, maybe Melanie knows about dread, and Georgie doesn't know, and then she gets into it. Maybe, I don't know. And obviously, most of the fears that she mentioned that she has, there's a nod to general fears in general, and also the dread powers, obviously. For Coke-Conspirators, Mia Hill is mentioned again as part of the Everybody Doubles ad. Also, this felt kind of similar to, was it episode 46, Slipping, with Adam, the guy who pretends to be the dead people by eating their bodies. He just wants to eat the dead bodies. Just let him. I don't think it is that, but it might have similar, impetus. This might be an organization that has tapped into this, especially because they say at the end of it, disclaimer, that these actors can't do anything. So that feels odd. They literally cannot do anything. And for bracket unreleased close bracket Magnus Opus, this is, like I said, recorded by Freddie. There's background sounds of the servers in the OIR, so that's interesting. The light detector is there as well. It detects when Celia lies about being okay. And this is before Celia worked for the OIR. And so it's a great introduction of how she sought out the OIR. It's Georgie that introduced it to her. That's how she went to search for a job to learn more about the Magnus Institute, because they are the only organization that did anything with the Institute after its fire. So, really fun explanation here. Celia did some research beforehand. She knew about the Research HQ explosion, which I don't know if that's separate than the 1999 fire, because the explosion happened in the 90s. But they keep mentioning the fire, and I don't know if it's the same thing or not, because they say 12 people died in that explosion. If only 12 people died, because I forget what episode it is, Celia mentions that 60 people were killed in the fire. And that 60, 12, that feels not a mistake. That feels deliberate. That feels like two different moments. I'm not sure, but there's that. Jonah Magnus was publicly killed in 1848, so there's no Jonah Magnus. At least I mean, yeah, it would be pretty difficult to fake or undo such a public killing like that. But Jonah Magnus was body hopping at some point, so maybe this happened before he was able to do that, or maybe he found some other way to continue living. But it seems like they're trying to say the creators of Magnus Protocol are trying to say, hey, Jonah Magnus died, and it's certain that he died, so he's not there. That's fun. And also, the Chartists themselves were mentioned in 27 Driven, and so that's like a good what's it called, foreshadowing for Jonah being killed by the Chartists. This episode introduces small, tiny questions that I don't think will get answered or need to be answered, but definitely fun questions, such as, was this flaming, twisted man real? That sounds like something that could happen, obviously. Was that an actual thing that occurred in the Magnus Protocol world, or is that just conspiracy shit again? Also, who became the head of the Institute after Jonah? Because after Jonah died, they mentioned that the Institute started changing what they were doing. And so I would want to know who is the head of the Institute. Who was the head of the Institute in 1999? Maybe that name is very important. And this gifted program is the same gifted program that was mentioned in 28 Interruptions that Sam took part of. So this is just another interesting view as to these gifted programs and the testing that happened here. And it's also really interesting to note that no scholarships were given to the kids who were tested here. So the gifted program didn't even do anything. And overall, this episode just gave me a sense that the Magnus Institute was very ineffective in what it was doing. So obviously they were doing something, but they kept changing what they wanted to do. So that feels like they kept failing what they were wanting to do. And overall, for all episodes, these episodes are not important, not needed for the plot, but also pretty good supplemental, not only for episode 6 for the lore world building that it does here, but also just casual building of character. It shows a different facet of Georgie Barker, because here she's a little bit more carefree. She's a conspiracy theorist. She's not a ghost hunter. She's not with Melanie, etc., etc. Really great character filling in for her, and also for Celia, how she got into the OIR and stuff like that. But also the fact that this episode was recorded by Freddie. That is also significant. I think that episode 6, bracket unreleased, close bracket Magnus Opus, should have been an episode. I think this episode could have been filled out a little bit more, and some episodes that I did not like in season 2 could have been filled in with this as sort of like an explanation as to why Celia got here, and also maybe Celia listens to this and she's like, I can't let anyone know about this. Freddie knows about this. Freddie's watching me. Freddie knows about me, etc., stuff like that. I feel like this could have been fitted pretty well, pretty easily, instead of some of the lesser episodes in season 2. I'm not going to name any numbers, but anyways. But yeah, overall, pretty fun stretch goals, and I think we did not expect, or I didn't even know that this was going to happen until it started happening. But from the buzz that I heard online, I don't think anyone really suspected it was going to be anything important up until this episode, the 6th episode that came out. And we'll see what happens then. I'm pretty sure, well, I'm staking a claim that it's very possible, and I can totally see them doing something with either like the haunting in Downing Street or the Mia Hill disappearance or anything similar to that. Something from these episodes returning in the future, just to have some sort of continuity, explanation, stuff like that. I wish there would have been a mention of Elric here. I think it'd been really fun if at least one sponsor ad was an Elric ad, or a business given money by Elric or something like that. Maybe it would have been too much. Maybe these ads are just fun jokes, because they were all pretty much fun jokes. But it is what it is. Hi, secret little bonus thing that while I'm editing, I'm going to rank these episodes. My least favorite, episode 2, Sprayed Ain't So, the chemtrails. I think that the conspiracies presented here were kind of haphazard, and I didn't quite like how the story flowed, so I didn't really enjoy that. Above that, episode 4, Strife on Mars. Alien conspiracies also felt a little disorganized, but I did at least understand how it was structured, in that it started pretty early, but a lot of things were very muddled here, and I didn't quite enjoy it, but I did like learning about some of these things. And then number 3 is in the middle, Da Minister. It was really fun learning about these conspiracies, and I liked it. It was a pretty good KGB spy conspiracy. And then above that, in third place, is episode 1, Dead Singer. And also, I just realized the joke in the name here, because I understand all of the jokes in the episodes, but I did not understand really Dead Singer. It's Dead Ringer for Dead Singer, and then it's the singer that I replaced. Anyways, I did like it. Really great introduction. I really liked the Paul McCartney and Avril Lavigne explanations, and then the Mia Hill thing is really interesting as well. So I like that a lot. Number 2, I really liked episode 6, Magnus Opus, because of everything that I talked about. It's a really great setup episode, and I really enjoyed that. And then number 1, Coke-Conspirator, episode 5. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it, and it was just a simple conspiracy that talked about everything here. Everything, all these episodes were about real life things, but I had a lot of fun learning about the Coke War, the Cola Wars, and the Coke conspiracies, and it felt exhilarating to hear it. I think it was structured very, very well. One of the best episodes of this season, of the 6-episode season of Sheeple Chase. So yeah. Anyways, I'm super excited for. We think that the third part of season 2 will come out hopefully early next year. Hopefully, but we'll see how long this hiatus lasts. But really fun supplemental between that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to be passionate, and I'll see you later.